Well, if you've been with me for a while, you've probably heard me mouth off a couple of times and tell you that I could show you Jesus and a dung beetle, which is more commonly referred to as a scarab beetle. What you're looking at here is a depiction of some late dynastic funerary accoutrements that are put on the deceased here. And what they used to use scarabs before and up into that time, but the addition here is the wings that are on it. If you've been with me a while, you've also heard me talk about whenever I was young and how this came, and all of a sudden I got a revelation at one point and then another and another. And one of the ones that was real important here is at about 7th grade or so, I was hearing music and looking at album covers, which were very revealing, and all of a sudden things started clicking together. And so I used the opening pick that was there for a Journey album cover, because this has been quite a journey that I've had over this 35 plus years. Well, way more than that. I've been saying that for years now. But Journey album covers always had this scarab onto it. Well, not always. There was one also that had the earth on it. I believe that was infinity, and then they had an infinity symbol and stuff. And there was an infinity symbol on other ones too. We'll look at those in just a minute, just for grins and giggles here. But also Aerosmith had a depiction that was very much like that, but its circle had an A in it for Aerosmith, but much like an anarchy type symbol. Rush had one, but didn't have wings, and it had Vitruvian Man trapped inside a pentagram, which is also extremely telling. But REO Speedwagon and a few other groups ended up showing this symbology. And I thought that it was strange, especially whenever I was studying and going back through it, and I had heard the story of the scarab, and one that I'll share with you here in a little bit, and how it all clicked all of a sudden. And I looked up, and my room used to be, like kids were back then, a lot of them, were a collage of Rolling Stone clips of guys and girls all over the wall, and collages, rock groups and stuff like that. And then album covers that I had 2 Dark Side of the Moon album covers, and I had it so it flipped, and it did it light into the prism, and then rainbow to prism, and then light. And I had a lot of other ones on the wall, and one of them was Journey, not the one that I showed for the opening pick. It was an earlier album. It was the one that actually had Wheel in the Sky in it. And that's strange, because whenever that all hit me, this song was one of the things that was like, showed me, hey, here's another thing. And it's like, oh, they know about all this, or whatever. Well, I sure found out about all of this, and I'll share it all with you here on Neptunes Lagoon today. But first, a word from our sponsors. Today we're sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. I'm just kidding, guys. I'm just kidding. Don't click. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I've seen that enough to make me sick. I'm sure you're sick of it too. So we'll look at other depictions of this, winged type of look. They have other scarabs. It's worn down and so on. Here's the other side, and you can see in the middle cartouche where it shows a scarab, and it's actually dawning the sun, and the sun is coming up here in a brand new day and horizon. Whenever I saw this before too, I thought, hey, maybe this is something with the way they made those stone pots, because this looks like on the sides of it, on the right and left, or this drill kind of thing if you held on to it in a pot, but that really didn't have anything to do with anything, truthfully. A lot of times they're covered with this faience and stuff, or it's right here, right? And so this is actually a glaze, like you think of in pottery today, where they put on this crystalline paint that actually has chips into it, which whenever fired, it gets to the point that it becomes molten and becomes glass effectively, and colored glass, and phew, it's just remarkable. usually a blue or a green, a turquoise or blue-green, but they've made them out of all kinds of stuff. And so you see the one on the left, but also this thing on the right's a papyrus. And so this is a sign of rebirth again too. This is like Osiris himself and how he grows up like papyrus out of him, and every year here it comes and everything, and it's the eternal, and it keeps happening no matter what. We cut it all down, it's all back again. And you can tell that this also looks like the pillars that they have in a lot of their temples, which are usually dedicated to this type of aspect. Other scarabs and so on that they're showing here, pictograms that are on them. This is the one of Tutankhamun right here. It says perfect God, Lord of the two lands. You can see in the center of it again the scarab and the sun. And another depiction of these winged things, because yeah, these are beetles, but they have wings on them and they can get flying, right? So that's one thing that's here, but also because of the symbology with the sun, and these people had winged sun disk, this symbol of the way the sun is carried by like a chariot across the sky, right? 4-horse chariot situation. But weirdly it goes with this beetle, and what makes that connection? Well, it has to do with dung. Seriously, and the way that they recreate. Let's just look into this here and we'll come back to some more pictures that are here. When you look into it here, for reasons that are not clear, although likely connected to the religious significance of the Egyptian god Khepre, he's a god that has a scarab for a face. Well, it's got a blue, they may show him. Strangely, they cut his head off. And so these amulets are forming scarab beetles and form an enormously popular thing in ancient Egypt. It's an iconography by the early Middle Kingdom, approximately 2000 BC, and remained popular for the rest of the Pharaonic period and beyond. During that long period, the function of scarabs repeatedly changed and added on to, actually, and some of the other first things don't seem to be really kept anymore. Primarily amulets were used, and they're also inscribed for use of personal administration seals, were incorporated into jewelry and so on. This is much as like as people have a Christ cross on them nowadays and so on. But these scarabs were created for political and diplomatic purposes to commemorate or advertise royal achievements by the new kingdom. Heart scarabs had become part of the battery of amulets protecting mummies, and from the Bronze Middle Age, other ancient peoples of the Mediterranean and the Middle East imported scarabs from Egypt, also produced scarabs in Egyptian or local styles, especially in the Levant, or what we call the Holy Lands, and the ancient Phoenicians and so on. So they're produced in vast numbers, and I'm just going to go through this. This is Wiki. It's been redone here in October again, so great time to get on to it. Just share a few things of you, because they say they're made in this, but they found ones that are in green jasper and amethyst, even carnelian. In ancient Egyptian religion, the god Ra is seen as the star Sirius. When the star came to the horizon in the south 15,000 years ago, beetles of the family Scarabidae, which are dung beetles, which there's a bunch of different types of them, but there's an Egyptian dung beetle, which is the scarab, rolled dung into a ball. Because of its symbolical similar action, the scarab was seen as a reflection of the precession cycle of the star Sirius, and as representing the idea of rebirth or regeneration on its swing in the south as it was viewed. Strangely, this is kind of like a swastika idea, if you get the idea of what was said, and the pivot point and the swirl. Yet it's also a daily thing that's happening with the sun. The Egyptian god Khepre, Ra, as the star Sirius, was often depicted as a scarab beetle or as a scarab beetle-headed man. The ancient Egyptians believed that Khepre, rolling it above the horizon, or the sun above the horizon, was the new birth of the star Sirius. and also the sun, as you've seen. And a golden scarab of Nefertiti was also discovered in the Illabruyan wreck, which I talked about the Illabruyan recently, and how we found a bunch of copper in there that are made into those oxides, but they're showing a 99.8% pure copper, and a lot of people, though they don't want to admit it, seems to be float copper from Michigan. But that's in another video. And also we've done ones on Nefertiti, her recent recreation bust of her, the fact she's got one blue eye and things, and then also all of her genetics to that whole part of 18th dynasty, and actually through the 18th and the 19th dynasty now they have, as a point of it, they have the genetics for. So that's one of the telling things there. That's how it works with the Sirius, but it also works towards the sun. And believe it or not, they don't really get into this. They make a little mention of it here if you read this whole thing. But heart scarabs became popular in the New Kingdom and remained in use until the Third Intermediate period. They're large scarabs, usually about 4 to 6 centimeters long, and made from dark green or black stone, and placed and pierced for suspension, like around their neck. The base of the heart scarab was usually carved either directly on, or a gold plate fixed to the base with hieroglyphs which named the deceased and repeat some or all of spell 30b from the Book of the Dead. This is right at the point, by the way, in it where a lot of people are familiar with that they're fixing to have the weighing of the heart, which is shown here, and you can see. And so this helped them in that idea in a strange way. We'll get to it here in just a second. The spell commands the deceased's heart, which is typically left in the mummy's chest cavity, unlike all the other parts that are put into the canoptic jars, right? Not to give evidence against the deceased. When the deceased is being judged by the gods of the underworld, it's often suggested that the heart is being commanded not to give false evidence, but the opposite may be true. Ha ha, dun dun dun. The Book of the Dead requires the heart scarab to be made of green Nemahef stone, but a variety of green or dark colored stones are used. Heart scarabs were often hung around the mummy's neck with a gold wire, and the scarab itself was held in a gold frame. How do they connect it with it, though? What do they have with it? Because beetles are known to have eaten people, eat cadavers, and so on. So what has this got to do with it? Because, you know, there are familiarities that I had whenever I was a kid, like watching The Mummy and all of those old movies. Most of them are black and white and stuff, and there was this, whenever you got in there and looking for treasure, the mummy would come alive and try to attack the people, and then he would never quit, and he was slowly coming at you always, right? Dragging the leg usually, right? Come to find out that no, that's the king. They have Shabti dolls that are supposed to do that, but that's in the afterlife situation. They're supposed to come into the people they represent. But in the earliest of dynasties, they actually used to kill their entourage to go with them. And they did the same thing in Samaria. But it's strange to believe or think in this line of thought, but because you were going with a king and you knew he was going to be all hooked up, people were actually willing to do this. So he took a whole entourage with him, a lot of times. But that turned into Shabti dolls, by the way. Real quickly, you'll find that all your entourage just can't be, no. Everybody that was left behind was like, no, basically. From the 20th dynasty onwards, large, relatively flat, unscribed pictorial scarabs were sewn via holes formed at the edges of the scarab, which if you looked at that first blue one, he had little holes everywhere, and it's sewn onto the chest of the mummies, together with a pair of separately outstretched wings. These were mainly made from faience and glazed blue, and the association of pictorial scarabs appears to be with the god Khepri again, who is often depicted in the same form, or having an actual scarab as a head rather than a hawk or falcon, if you will, or whether, all the other creatures. That was his one. Change batteries real quick here. So the third kind of funerary scarab is the Naturalist Scarab, and these were relatively small scarabs, typically 2 to 3 centimeters long, and made from a wide variety of hard stones and faience, and are distinguished from other scarabs for having naturalist carved 3D bases, by the way, which are also included integral and special loop running widthways. Groups of these funerary scarabs are often made from different materials, formed from part of the battery of amulets which protect mummies in the late periods. Now, here's the trick in the way it works. You see, because there are a whole series of things with the Book of the Dead, and you've got to memorize this whole thing. So when a person died and went to their final judgment, the gods of the underworld would ask many detailed and intricate questions, which had to pass, which had to be answered precisely and ritually, according to the Book of the Dead, or the Book of Coming Forth by Day, which is another sun symbology again. Since many people of those days were illiterate, even placing a copy of this scroll in their coffin would not be enough to protect them from being sent to hell for giving a wrong answer. Well, it's a different kind of hell, too, and the afterlife was a different kind of Elysian Fields type of thing, wasn't it, too? But the idea here is that's why there's a lot of pictures on the Book of the Dead, if you can, and especially at certain points there, because you were supposed to remember this story. And maybe the pictures helped you like a comic book, kind of. Wasn't too difficult. If you go through it a few times, you can pretty much recite it back to somebody. But as a result, the priest would read the questions and their appropriate answers to a beetle, a dung beetle, which would then be killed, mummified, and placed in the ear of the deceased. When the gods asked their questions, the ghostly scarab would whisper the correct answer into the ear of the supplicant, who could then answer the gods wisely and correctly, and there would be no problems. We've talked before about how they had all these fail-safe methods. In fact, the Book of the Dead that we always talk about is a fail-safe method. Right? So often found with scarabs are carved with the names of pharaohs and so on. We saw Tutmosis that was there. And again, let's see if I can show this to you. On my wall, whenever I was a kid, I had a lot of album covers like I talked about. And I mean, there was hundreds of pictures really. But the album Captured, which you can see the scarab that's in there, and that whipping up type of look. Escape or Escape, and it's a scarab. It's busting out of, well, that's not Earth, that's something else, some gas giant planet it looks like, but looks like it's made of glass and shattered when he comes out of it, which is different and reminiscent of the actual egg, which I'll get to here shortly. Here's another one, Journey's Greatest Hits, and it always has this wing thing on it here. But there's that scarab. Now, another thing about whenever I was a kid, which is around the time of disco and Saturday Night Fever and all these things, when I talked about whenever this came about, I had a friend of my brother's that had that album which had Wheel in the Sky on it, and we'd heard it a few times, and then after studying it, all these things came to me, and all of a sudden I realized, wow. And he was the first guy that taught me to play the guitar, and one of the first songs that I learned from him, or the major part of it, was Wheel in the Sky, if you've ever heard the song. And it goes together. After him doing that, I turned around and I go, you told me something, I'm going to try to share something with you, and just literally blow his mind with the shit and with the album cover, and right here on your 8-track tape, by the way. So that dates it again too. Also, people during this time, because of like Urban Cowboy and all this stuff, and I live down there in Texas, were taking this type of symbol of feathers and putting it on the front of their cowboy hats. You'll still see it time and time again, but that's kind of a look back at this 5-year period, maybe, that was like a big fad of doing it. So here's a rival too, and this is almost like an Egyptian one. You can really see that it's made out of it. It has the symbol at the bottom that's a universal symbol pretty much of infinity. They had an album called Infinity, but it didn't have the scarab in the middle. That's the one that had the Earth. Then again, I've got a video on it on King Tut, and how his was this elaborate one, more than this, and it had this glass see-through yellowish stone that's the scarab. Pardon me. And the scarab we find is made out of glass, that Libyan desert glass, where long ago there was an air bolide type event that happened there, and because of it frying, actually made a little area, well, not little, it's like 4 point something kilometers, kind of wobbly shaped. And through that whole area of Libya, you can find it's all cracked up now, but people going all the way out there and getting this glass and then carving it down to where it looked like a beetle. It's incredible. Generations has it on there too. You can easily see that. Revelations, which is the one that I picked for the opening shot that's there, and below it, it actually shows the old version and a symbol of the phoenix and rebirth, and then boom, and colored light cut into a rainbow, journey, revelation, and even the essential, which seemed to go back to the old concept that looks just like the Egyptian one, right? So there's that. And then of course, I saw this Twilight Zone episode that they describe here, where there's the Queen of the Nile, and what happened during the Queen of the Nile one was she had a scarab beetle that she would suck the life out of people and drain the life, or drain the youth out of people to make them old, and she would help enable her to remain young forever. It was Miss Morris. She tells her final victim that she got it from the pharaohs who understood its power. Right? Other people might remember this from the Disney animated movie Aladdin, the location of the Cave of Wonders that starts it off with a Sphinx-type lion head coming up and roar out of the ground, and they walk down and into that creature, if you will, into his intestines. And by doing that, which, hey, maybe he got eaten instead, right? Dun, dun, dun. But they had to put two halves together, that scarab beetle, or joined together, and this is what kicked off the whole thing that led them to Aladdin's lamp. But that's something that's a little more Persian, and that influence, if you will. But that influence had gone quite a distance ways. And if you've ever played Tomb Raider, The Last Revelation, by the way, it's in there. I didn't show a picture of one on there. No, it's just Tomb Raider. So there's a lot of pictures that on here, and here I'll show you a couple of them that I didn't show before. This is an intricate web, a net that's made out of faience here, and what they're making is faience tubes, or making stone tubes here, and then covering with faience, and then firing them to get the glaze onto them, and they're all the same size, and then hooking it together to make this net that goes on here, and they're gold clasp between each one of them. I'll show you one here in a minute that's made out of silver, and it's real rare for them to use silver, of course, with its value and rarity and so on, but you can also see two of these shabtis that are attached to it, and then of course the scarab that's there. Here's another view of a modern kind of scarab that's produced. Still has the same symbology, and it's usually taken directly from one. Here's Amenophis the third in his lion hunt scarab. Here's the top view onto it, but if you look at the back of it, it's kind of got the whole little story right there onto it. So that's pretty neat. Before I go into this other concept, let me go up here and show you what I was talking before about. And so this is the mummy, and that's Queen Maruna, her coffin. And if you look, it's all laid out in silver, but if you look here, all of her faience has been done with silver in between. Silver across her chest with the giant scarab type thing, and chest piece, everything is done in silver, but these are the tops of the scarabs that are put with her, so you can see they're pretty good size, especially for this queen. And if we go back one, you can see all these different ways that are made, and of course they're showing you these, but then a lot of these don't even have the real scarab. The scarab on one side, this is what's on the other. right? So there's a crocodile and a rhino and papyrus reeds and a wasp that's up here and so on. But the other side looks like this basically, or this, where it's pretty much a scarab. And I could go on and on about it, but here we get another idea that I can share with you. For the Greeks even talked about this in one part, and it was kind of strange that they talk about it, but it had to do with this dung beetle. And it had to do with, priests, and eventually what become the Library of Alexandria. But before that time, it seems it comes from way back. In fact, there's some identification where this rolling of a ball idea has to do with the Greek tale of a man rolling a ball all day and then it rolling back at night and so on. Because in the tale, it kind of relates that over time, what this guy had seen, because he goes out and sits up under date palm trees or whatever, is dung beetles rolling up this dung in a perfect ball up this hill that's just kind of like they're doing here. Well, there's two of them fighting each other, and that kind of sucks. But he had been seeing this going on for a period of time, and it was weird, but it was kind of that roll a ball up all day. There's no discernation between a male or a female, no sexual dimorphism on this beetle like there is in a lot of others, and so they therefore thought that this must be a female, because he eventually took one of these and put it into a tray that's pretty good size and put some sand in it, and while it kept trying to roll around, it eventually stopped. And then out of the ball that had been rolling, like the sun rolling around and around, or our earth rolling around and around, as if on the other side of the earth from us there was some magic giant beetle rolling the earth around and around. So we were seeing the sun roll up every day on this ball, right? Out of that ball became spontaneous life, and he didn't see any male involved with this whatsoever. So this seemed to be like a virgin type birth. Seriously, think about it. And spontaneous or asexual reproduction, if you will, or something that spawned again and so on, because these little beetles all of a sudden got going again, and then lo and behold, when they got big enough, they rolled a little bitty ball of poo and got it going and started doing their own ball type thing, and here it goes. So that's one way you can hook it up to a Jesus idea of rebirth and so on. But here's another one. It's called a scarab. But linguists have put together this and the idea and ancient zodiacs and the way that it worked and said, it's got to do with the ancient symbol of the crab too. In fact, crab comes from scarab. Take the S off the front of it and it's carab. Now, the thing about this carab is that it walks sideways for 3 days, and supposedly this beetle, whenever it rolls up its doo-doo, and then, it's dung, and where this guy was sitting, there was the stables near there, so these things kept doing this thing and rolling it all the way here, and then up this hill where he was sitting, little escarpment, whatever. And by watching this in action with no female around and symbolizing the sun coming up each day and things like that, the idea that was put together that they had some type of knowledge it was going on, that they have some type of instinct that a lot of animals we know of, like birds and so on, seem to have an instinct. They know the seasons, they know this, they know that, and they don't know anything, but they know that. They even know when to breed, so they had the children at the right season and stuff. It's just all natural with them. We have to drive it and get all these things together and come up with deals. Now we have kids any time of year because we can sustain such. But In ancient times, it's looked at that people did try to gear towards seasons to make it easier on everybody and themselves, of course, and the children, and make it work out much better. So we have the idea of this sunball and a virgin type of birth, which they noticed, and then they checked it out. Apparently they tried this over and over again, like experiments that were going on all the way through the time of the Library of Alexandria. There's not any male involved here, because they never saw them having sex, and if they ever did, it seemed like it was too far apart and they weren't doing the ball right after and so on. Well, they do it at a certain time and a certain period of time after they copulate, and they have the ability to copulate and wait a little bit apparently, and then impregnate the ball, and then of course there's a good period of time that goes in between that, and they roll it away. As much as 3 days travel. So how does that work with the crab and scarab and things? Well, to see the crab during the middle of the summer, we've talked about the winter solstice and how that hooks up with Jesus so many times, right? But if you think about the reciprocal of the idea, it happens during summer too. And the sun, rather than falling 1 degree per day until December 21st and stopping because of the pivot of our planet and going back up to summer slowly, stays still for 3 days and then starts to rise again. Well, in the middle of summer, right when we hit the pitch tip of summer, it seems to do the same thing where you can't really tell, and then it continues on. And this is during the time of the crab, especially during the zodiacal time whenever it runs around here, and that pinpoints that they've been doing this stuff for about 10,000 years or so, give or take a little bit for the cusps and so on here. So that's a strange connection and probably something that comes from the Wayback Machine. But how does it do with the dung beetle? Are they all over the place? Yeah, they're all over the place, but they're real popular and they show up in Egypt a lot, and because of the sand and their exclusivity and people notice them, it's been a thing too. I remember watching it too on some kind of David Attenborough thing whenever I was a kid. And, that was another revelation. So you can imagine that Buddha sat up under a tree and he was enlightened. Well, you can imagine the Greeks here, whenever they do something like this and looked at it, how they become enlightened. It's got a lot to do with enlightenment. Just like Jesus Christ was supposed to be a god of that, and he's actually a sun god, which I've shown you again with that dying in December 21st and back up at 25th, and everybody always tries to chime in. Well, they figured out, yeah, because of the festival that was before that, they described it couldn't have been so it looks like it was at September 11th whenever it was about that happened. Oh, isn't that a number too? But also that used to be the ancient end of the year and harvest time, so we get another concept that can kind of go with that. So here's the one from the marriage of Queen Tai and from Amenhotep. Now, Queen Tai, we talked about before, she's the granddaughter or grandmother of King Tut. And through Akhenaten and so on. So the exact lineage works is she's the daughter of Yuya and Thuya that I've shown and have a separate video about, that are the ones that are blonde, and he almost looks like Abraham Lincoln with blonde hair, and she looks like a school lady. There are a lot of videos now they finally showed about this because they don't want to be as ambiguous anymore and slowly edit it out. She's becoming the great royal wife of the Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep, and she was the mother of Akhenaten and therefore the grandmother of Tutankhamun. And in 2010, DNA analysis confirmed her as the mummy known as the Elder Lady found in the tomb. And now we have twice been verified on the fact she was haplogroup mtDNA-K. And in fact, all the women through that range really were, except for back at Thuya and Yuya, he was actually G2. And there's another one that's attached, I believe, later onto it, which Egyptologist 7 showed a video about, that's H1, is it, or is it H2? Anyhow, it's a variation of that type, but all the women through there were like K, and then all that shows Upper Anatolian, or people that used to be in Upper Anatolia, and a lot of them are in Europe, and the males of which all the way through that Akhenaten and so on, down through King Tut, and of course, he didn't have any past lineages, but it came from before that, and people that jump in after it, and it goes back from father to son, farther back, so I believe they traced it back to 1 before even Amenhotep III here, as being R1B1. B, it's M269, I believe, or something here. So, but that's the one from her marriage scarab, and if you look, it's lavender instead of green, which is cool. But that's a sign of rebirth and life and things like that. So that's what it really has connectives for. Here's the one for Sinusret, and you can see the sun symbology that goes along with this too. So why it goes with the Sirius and what they're talking about too, and that's another connective and a secret thing and a zodiacal concept, and something that almost does the whip like they're talking about, that's somewhat like a swastika idea. It also goes with the daily rebirth of the sun, spontaneous rebirth, the idea of Osiris and being a god of spring and rebirth, and out of him forms all of the reeds and things that come out of such. So you can see that symbology there, and of course Jesus is hooked up with the spring rites too, isn't he? So there it is with that, and also the scarabs, and also talking about how, when I was a kid, all this stuff was surrounding you in a lot of ways, and there's so many other things I could show you that were around at that time, and in movies and all types of stuff that were going on, which I showed one with Indiana Jones and so on, but of course that carried on until close to a modern day. I hear they're maybe doing another one. So blue-green's got to do with it too, and then that's got to do with the sky and rebirth of the land and things too. So it all had a symbology with it, and again, it has connectives that we can look at in a lot of ways, but also that concept of a virgin birth where there's no male involved here, it seems, and all of a sudden, boom, out of the earth, beetles just happen. What if this could happen to people? It's as above, so below concept, and what's going on here, and the magic in creatures. People used to look at the magic in creatures, and of course when birds fly, and I've done videos about that, and discerning and divination off of birds even. But bird symbology goes way, way back, but also whenever they fly north and south for the winter and all those things that happen, and you kind of watch the birds, and and all these ancient sages were doing it too, watching, letting you know whenever there was going to be a change, and here comes the cold of winter, which is also an embracement of Halloween we just went through, and Samhain, which is really Samhain in ancient Irish, because they're kind of screwed up in the way the noises come out of their spelling, but at that same thing, it really means summer's end. And so when could you tell? Well, it was at the fall and the civil, right in there, but what signifies it? Well, it seems to fall around everybody else's Day of the Dead, and there's meteor showers that go along with that, but that doesn't really have to do with this. Hey, another thing, when I was a kid, there was a Almighty Isis. Yeah, it was a Saturday morning cartoon thing, but one of the ones that they had live, like Electro Woman and Dinah Girl and Sigmund and the Sea Monsters. Anybody remember these things? Anyhow, they had Almighty Isis. She had a scarab too that she would clasp, and she would say Almighty Isis and turn into Isis. She didn't have to spin around like Wonder Woman, I don't think. She was just like that. But there's Tutankhamun's again. I see a cross over the right, standing on the top of the sun, but perfect Lord, perfect God, Lord of the two lands. For a while. That's King Tut's. Neter, Nefer, Nebtai. Let me know what you think and see if you hear a connection in that or feel the connection that I was talking about and the way scarabs work in this. Anybody have a Journey album cover or remember a lot of the references I even made in this? Well, I talked about them being on records. You know what a record is? Peace.